He was just a broke single father stopping at a gas station in the middle of a storm. She was a pregnant CEO worth millions, hiding tears in the shadows of a vending machine. Neither of them knew that their chance encounter would shatter everything they thought they knew about family, love, and miracles, and change three lives forever. The rain was falling in heavy sheets, drumming against the hood of Noah Harris's battered old pickup as he pulled into the lonely gas station on the outskirts of Newark. The dashboard light flickered with the faint glow of a nearly empty fuel gauge, and the windshield wipers squeaked as they fought to clear the storm. Noah killed the engine, and for a moment the silence inside the cab was broken only by the soft breathing of his daughter in the back seat. 5-year-old Lily was curled up beneath her faded pink blanket, her curls plastered to her forehead, her small hand clutching the stuffed rabbit she refused to part with even in her sleep. She had been so brave at the hospital that day, smiling at the nurses, even cracking a joke or two, but Noah could see how pale she looked now. The tests hadn't gone well. Again. Her body was still losing the battle against the rare aplastic anemia that seemed intent on robbing her of her childhood. Noah rubbed his eyes with the heel of his hand, exhaustion pressing down on him like lead. He was 31, but in moments like this, with medical bills piling up and the weight of the world sitting on his shoulders, he felt decades older. He got out of the truck, pulling his jacket tighter against the rain, and headed toward the small convenience store. The neon sign buzzed faintly above him, casting pale green light on the slick pavement. That was when he noticed her. At first, through the blur of the rain, he thought she was just another stranded traveler. But as he came closer, the details sharpened. A young woman stood by the vending machines, her expensive coat clinging to her body, her blonde hair matted and wet. Her hands trembled as she tried to dial on a phone with a shattered screen. And when the device slipped from her fingers and hit the ground, she gave a small, broken sound that was somewhere between a sob and a laugh. She pressed her palm against her rounded belly and bent her head, as if bracing herself against more than just the cold wind. Noah hesitated, aware of the awkwardness of approaching a stranger in the middle of the night, but the raw despair in her posture drew him in. He cleared his throat. "Hey, are you all right?" His voice was quiet, cautious, the voice of a man who had learned not to push too hard when someone was hurting. The woman lifted her head. Even through the dim light and the rain, her eyes were striking, deep brown, brimming with tears she clearly didn't want to shed in public. She let out a shaky breath. "My phone's dead. My driver left. And I think there are photographers out there somewhere," she said in a rush. Her words clipped, as if she'd rehearsed explanations too many times already. Then she gave a bitter little smile. "Perfect evening, Harper." It took Noah a moment to realize she had said her own name aloud, as though mocking herself. Something clicked in his memory. Magazine covers at the grocery store checkout, headlines on news feeds. Harper Lane, the wunderkind CEO of Lantern Pay, one of those new fintech empires that people argued about constantly on the radio. The girl who had been called the youngest self-made woman in Silicon Valley, now standing in the rain at a gas station, clutching her belly like it was the only anchor she had left. "You're Harper?" Noah asked before he could stop himself. She gave a short, almost defiant nod. "Yes, that Harper. And yes, I'm pregnant. And right now the only thing I want in this world is hot chocolate. Not an interview, not a statement, not a press release. Just hot chocolate." For a second, Noah just stared at her, caught between disbelief and the strange urge to laugh at the absurdity of it all. A millionaire CEO, drenched and stranded in the middle of nowhere, craving the same thing his daughter always begged him for after school. He stepped forward, swiped his card in the vending machine, and punched the button. Hot chocolate coming right up. As the machine whirred to life, he glanced back at his truck. Through the fog glass, he could still see Lily's small form, safe and warm in the back seat. Then he looked at Harper again. Cold, shivering, eyes rimmed red. And in that moment, it struck him that money, power, all the things she was supposed to have, none of it protected her from the rain or the loneliness pressing down on her tonight. Millionaires, he thought, get cold in the rain too. The diner was nearly empty, a hollow shell of neon lights and vinyl booths that smelled faintly of burnt coffee and fried onions. The storm outside pounded against the glass, the wind howling as though it was trying to break through the thin walls. Noah pushed open the door and held it for Harper, who stepped in hesitantly, dripping water onto the checkered linoleum floor. She kept one arm folded across her stomach, the other clutching the paper cup of hot chocolate he had handed her moments before. Her blonde hair, now damp and tangled, framed her pale face in loose strands, and her eyes, still swollen from tears, flicked warily around the empty room. Noah gestured toward a booth in the corner, the one closest to the window where he could keep his old pickup truck in sight. Lily was still asleep in the back seat, bundled up, safe for now. He slid into one side of the booth, the vinyl squeaking under his weight, while Harper sat gingerly on the other, holding the cup with both hands as though it might anchor her. "Sorry for dragging you into this," Noah said after a pause. His voice carried the rough edge of exhaustion. "It's not exactly the best night." Harper let out a short, humorless laugh, steam from her drink curling up toward her face. "The night? Try the whole year." She shook her head and stared into the chocolate, as though it might provide answers. "My partners are circling like vultures. The press can't get enough of tearing me apart, and—" Her voice cracked slightly, but she straightened, forcing composure. "The father of my child died in November. Plane crash. I decided to keep the baby. And every single day since then, I've been trying to convince myself I can handle it all. That I'm strong enough. That I don't need anyone." Noah didn't speak right away. He watched her, really watched her, seeing the cracks beneath the armor. In the media, she had always been portrayed as sharp, unshakable, a woman who built an empire from nothing and never blinked. But here she was, trembling in a cheap diner, barely holding herself together. He felt a flicker of something he hadn't let himself feel in a long time. Recognition. The exhaustion of someone who had been carrying too much, too long. He rubbed the back of his neck. "I get that," he said quietly. "I mean, not all of it. But the part about pretending you're strong enough." Her eyes lifted from the cup, studying him. "You have someone waiting for you. In the truck?" "My daughter, Lily." His lips curved into the ghost of a smile. "She's 5. She's tougher than I'll ever be. But she's sick. A plastic anemia. She needs a transplant. We're waiting for a donor match, but so far—" He trailed off, the words heavy, like stones dropping into a bottomless well. Harper's brows knit together, her expression softening in a way Noah hadn't expected. "The registry?" she asked. He nodded. "Yeah, they're searching, but nothing yet. And time—" He didn't finish. He didn't have to. Harper leaned back against the booth, exhaling slowly, as if making a decision. "Lantern Pay has a healthcare fund," she said. "We've worked with hospitals, coordinators, researchers. I can make some calls. Sometimes cord blood banks have what registries don't." Noah shook his head, the instinctive refusal of a man too used to fending for himself. That's too much. It's expensive." "Expensive," Harper said firmly, her eyes locking on his, "is when you wait too long, when it's too late. Calls and paperwork? That isn't expensive. That's just people doing their jobs. And I can make sure they do them." The conviction in her tone left him momentarily speechless. She didn't say it like someone offering charity or pity. She said it like someone who had made a decision, someone used to moving mountains and not taking no for an answer. Outside, lightning split the sky, briefly illuminating the truck in the lot. Through the fogged window, Noah could just make out Lily's small, sleeping form. He swallowed hard, his chest tightening. For months, he had been trudging forward alone, trying to be both mother and father, nurse and provider, protector and optimist. Every night he told himself he would manage, that he didn't need anyone's help, that relying on someone else would only make the crash worse when they walked away. But now across from him sat a woman he had only just met, offering him something he hadn't allowed himself to hope for in a long time. Real help. And not just from anyone, but from someone who had the power and the will to actually move the needle. He met her gaze again. She was still clutching the hot chocolate like it was her lifeline, still damp and weary, still very much human despite the headlines that made her into something untouchable. And for the first time in months, Noah felt something inside him shift. A small spark of air in the suffocating darkness. Harper Lane, Millionaire CEO, was offering him hope. And Noah Harris, broke mechanic and single father, found himself starting to believe her. The children's hospital smelled faintly of antiseptic and something sweet, maybe the bubblegum-scented soap they gave the kids to soften the edges of fear. The halls were painted with faded murals of animals and smiling suns, But the brightness only highlighted how heavy everything felt. Noah Harris walked through the glass doors with Lily in his arms, her head resting on his shoulder, her small body heavier than it should have been for her age. She was tired, pale, but still managed to lift her hand and wave weakly at the receptionist behind the desk. Harper Lane was already there, waiting. She didn't look like the woman from glossy magazine covers or business headlines. She wore sneakers, black leggings, and a hoodie pulled low over her head, her hair tied back in a messy knot. Without makeup and her usual armor, she could have been mistaken for any young mother waiting for a pediatric appointment, except for the way her presence seemed to change the air. Quiet but commanding, like she was used to walking into rooms and making things happen. She looked up when she saw Noah and Lily, and for the first time since he had met her at the gas station, her face softened into something like warmth. She crossed the waiting room quickly. "Hey," she said quietly, as if she didn't want her voice to echo in the sterile space. "I'm glad you came." Noah nodded, shifting Lily a little. She wanted to see the doctor today anyway. "And you said there'd be someone here." A woman in a blazer was already waiting in the corridor, a folder balanced against her hip. She smiled, professional but kind. "I'm Rena. I work with the Lantern Pay Healthcare Fund. I'll be coordinating the search." Noah blinked at the papers she carried. Stacks of forms and authorizations, acronyms and medical codes he only half understood. He had dealt with paperwork before, but this was different. It felt like someone had taken the endless, bureaucratic mountain he had been climbing alone and laid out a map. Lily perked up a little when Harper crouched in front of her. "Hi, sunshine," Harper said gently, her voice almost playful. "What are you drawing today?" Lily held up her tablet, where a shaky but determined sun with a smiling face and long yellow rays filled the screen. "It's us," she whispered, glancing shyly at Harper. "You're one of the rays." Harper smiled and something flickered across her face. A kind of wonder, maybe even vulnerability. "That's the best thing anyone has ever said to me," she murmured, then stood, clearing her throat as if shaking it off. She looked at Noah. "Let's get started." In the small consultation room, the doctor began flipping through pages of Lily's file, speaking in a low, measured tone. "So far, the registry hasn't found a strong match. We've seen weak compatibility here and there, but nothing that would hold through transplant." He looked up, his expression heavy but professional. "What we need is either two strong units of cord blood or a near-perfect donor match." Noah's throat tightened. He had heard this before, too many times. Each repetition made it feel more final. But before he could sink into that familiar pit of despair, Harper spoke. "Expand the search," she said firmly, her tone so certain that it silenced the room. "Check unregistered banks. Reach out to international registries if you have to. And," she added, placing a steadying hand on the back of a chair, "I deliver in 3 to 4 weeks. I want you to prepare for direct donation programs. My child's cord blood will be stored and tested. If it's a strong match, it's hers." She nodded toward Lily. The doctor blinked, caught off guard. "That's an unusual step. Direct donation is rare, but if it works, yes, it could save her life." Noah's head snapped toward Harper. His voice was low, almost rough. "You don't owe me this." Harper met his gaze without flinching. "I know. I owe it to myself, to my baby, to prove that we don't have to face everything alone." She glanced at Lily again, then back at Noah. "You've been carrying this by yourself for too long. Let me carry some of it too." For a moment, the silence was thick. Noah looked at her, really looked, and realized she wasn't saying this for appearances, for some story the media could twist into a headline. She was saying it because she meant it, because somewhere between the storm at the gas station and this hospital hallway, two broken paths had crossed, and maybe, just maybe, they could help each other heal. Lily giggled softly, breaking the tension. "See, Daddy," she whispered, showing him the tablet again. "She really is one of the rays." Noah swallowed hard, blinking away the sting in his eyes. For the first time in a long time, hope didn't feel like a cruel trick. It felt real. The storm outside had quieted, but inside Harper Lane's world, the thunder only grew louder. In the glossy glass tower of Lantern Pay's headquarters, the boardroom was full, every leather chair occupied, every pair of eyes fixed on her with a mixture of calculation and thinly veiled hostility. The long table gleamed under the sterile light, its polished surface reflecting the faces of men and women who had once toasted her as their prodigy. Now they leaned forward like predators, scenting weakness. A leak had hit the media the night before. A blurry photograph splashed across financial blogs and gossip sites alike. Harper Lane, the Golden CEO, caught at a gas station in the dead of night, talking to a stranger with a little girl asleep in a truck behind him. The headlines had been merciless. Pregnant CEO melts down at roadside. Lantern pay in trouble as Lane's private life erupts. Some called it reckless. Others hinted at scandal, and the board saw blood in the water. "We cannot afford this distraction," one of the directors said, his voice sharp. He was in his 60s, a man who had once promised to mentor her, but who now practically snarled with impatience. "The partnership with TransCore is already wavering. Investors want reassurance, not tabloid drama." Harper kept her posture straight, her hands folded neatly on the table. But inside her chest, her heart pounded hard enough to bruise. She could almost hear the faint ringing of paparazzi camera shutters outside the building, waiting to feed on whatever scraps of weakness she showed here. "Distraction?" she repeated, her tone controlled. "You call ensuring the future of families a distraction?" "Don't twist this into philanthropy," another board member cut in, her red lips curled into a tight smile. "We all saw the photos. A mystery man, a sick child, you out in the rain. It looks careless, emotional. That's not the image our shareholders pay you to project." Careless, emotional. Words that would never have been used against her if she weren't pregnant, if she weren't a woman who dared to look vulnerable in public. Harper took a slow breath. She turned to her PR director, who was shifting uneasily at the end of the table. "You've drafted responses?" "Yes, but they're weak," the woman admitted. "The narrative is already moving. If we don't act decisively, we'll lose control of the story." For a long moment, Harper's gaze dropped to her hands, to the faint tremor she had learned to hide so well. Then she lifted her head, eyes blazing with a steadiness that cut through the room. "Fine," she said. "Then let's not fight the story. Let's own it. Tomorrow we announce the Gift of Life initiative. Free cord blood collection and donation kits in hospitals across the country. Families who can't afford storage will never have to choose between saving lives and paying rent. We make it transparent, traceable, accessible. We build something real." The CFO nearly choked on his breath. "That will cost tens of millions." Harper leaned forward, her voice like a blade. "And lost lives cost more. You want reassurance for investors? Show them we're not just another fintech empire squeezing profits. Show them we're the company that saves children, that builds trust, that stands for something bigger than quarterly numbers." Silence followed, the kind that comes when people don't know whether to applaud or fire the speaker on the spot. Meanwhile, across town, Noah Harris's doorbell rang. When he opened it, two officials from Child Protective Services stood in the rain, clipboards in hand. They said there had been a report: unstable income, unsafe housing, a child with medical needs left vulnerable. Noah's stomach dropped. Someone had filed this concern at just the right moment, and he could guess who had pulled the strings. They walked through his modest home, noting the peeling wallpaper, the secondhand furniture, the cramped bedroom Lily slept in. Every tick of their pens felt like judgment carved into stone. Lily sat quietly on the couch, clutching her stuffed rabbit, wide-eyed at the strangers who spoke about her life as though she weren't in the room. Noah's throat burned with anger and helplessness. He tried to explain. He worked long hours at the garage. He cooked her meals. He kept her safe. He did everything, but he could see the skepticism in their eyes. He was a single father with bills he could barely pay. To them, he was a risk. Then Harper's lawyer arrived, a tall woman in a sharp suit, her badge glinting under the dim hallway light. She spoke quickly, firmly, and with the kind of authority Noah could never muster. The officials backed down, retreating with muttered assurances that this was just procedure and nothing to worry about. But long after they left, Noah's hands still shook. He sat on the couch with Lily asleep against his chest, staring at the door as though it might open again at any second. He realized then that whatever storm Harper was weathering, it was bleeding into his world too. And though she had thrown him a lifeline, she had also pulled him into deeper waters than he had ever imagined. That night in her penthouse high above the city, Harper sat by the window, one hand resting on her belly. The board wanted her gone, the press wanted her broken, and her enemies wanted her isolated. But she thought of Lily's tired smile, of Noah's haunted eyes, of the fragile spark of hope they had found together at the hospital. She whispered to the silence, almost like a vow, "They think this is my weakness. They have no idea it's my strength." Rain beat against the windshield of Noah's pickup in relentless sheets, blurring the world into streaks of gray. He sat parked along the desolate pier, the smell of salt water and gasoline heavy in the air, a lukewarm paper cup of coffee clutched between his hands. The pier lights flickered in the storm, casting fractured reflections across the black water. He hadn't intended to come here. He just drove until the road ended. It was the kind of night where thoughts felt heavier, where exhaustion pressed so deep into his bones, he wasn't sure if he could keep carrying it. He closed his eyes for a moment, and in the silence all he could see was Lily. Her face in the hospital bed, pale but stubbornly smiling, her hand gripping his as the doctor explained the numbers that never seemed to change. He wanted to believe there was an end to this, that one day she'd run in the park again without stumbling, that one day her laugh wouldn't be followed by a cough that cut him to the core. But hope was dangerous. Hope kept tearing open wounds he tried to cauterize with practicality. The buzz of his phone jolted him back. He almost ignored it. He couldn't take another bill reminder or another vague no updates call. But something in him made him swipe the screen. "This is Rena, the coordinator from the fund," came the voice on the other end, quick and breathless. "Noah, are you sitting down?" His heart kicked. "Just tell me." "We have preliminary results from the cord blood tests," Rena said, her voice breaking into a smile. "There's a match. 9 out of 10 markers. It's strong, very strong. If these results hold, it could mean Lily has a real chance." The coffee cup slipped from his hands, spilling across the floor mat, but he didn't care. He pressed the phone tighter to his ear, his throat closing as tears burned. 9 out of 10? "Yes," Rena said, gentle now. "It's not confirmed until final labs, but Noah, this is the best news we've had." He laughed then, an unsteady half-sob of disbelief. For months, every phone call had carried bad news, one blow after another, and now, for the first time, there was light. He wiped his face with the heel of his hand, choking on relief. "Thank you," he whispered, though the words were too small for what he felt. As soon as the call ended, he dialed Harper. It rang over the sound of clinking glasses and distant chatter. When she picked up, her voice was taut, like she was holding her breath. "Noah?" "They found a match," he said. His voice cracked, but he didn't care. 9 out of 10. "Harper, it's your baby's blood. It could save her." There was silence for a moment, broken only by the muffled roar of a crowd on her end. Then he heard the quick hitch of her breath. "Oh my God!" She sounded as if the storm outside had just crashed through her chest. "Where are you?" he asked. "At a charity gala," she said, almost spitting the words. "They're circling. Reporters, board members. They're waiting for me to stumble. I can't breathe here." "Then don't stay," Noah said, his voice hard with sudden certainty. "Don't give them what they want. Come to me. Not the cameras, not the speeches. Just come to me." A pause, then a trembling exhale. "Where?" "Back exit. I'll be there." Noah drove through the rain like a man possessed, the wipers unable to keep up with the downpour. When he reached the venue, the contrast was almost surreal. Inside, glittering lights spilled across marble floors, the hum of violins leaking through heavy doors. Outside, by the service exit, it was another world. Dark, damp, littered with discarded cigarette butts and torn event posters. And there she was. Harper stood under a sagging awning, rain dripping down the collar of her black gown. She clutched a sleek clutch bag against her side, as though it were armor, her hair damp around her face, her eyes scanning the shadows. For a heartbeat, Noah simply stared at her. The image of power wrapped in fragility, a woman who carried the weight of a billion-dollar company, yet looked so small against the storm. He stepped forward, his chest tightening with everything he wanted to say but couldn't. The words that came out were simple, raw. 9 out of 10. Her eyes widened. Tears welled up instantly, but this time they weren't from fear or anger. She pressed her hand against her lips, her shoulders shaking once before she moved toward him. And then, without hesitation, Harper Lane, the untouchable CEO, wrapped her arms around Noah Harris like she had been drowning for months, and he was the only solid thing left in the world. He held her, feeling the tremor in her body, the rush of her breath against his shoulder. For a moment, the rain, the world, all of it disappeared. Then we'll weather this storm together, she whispered fiercely into his chest. To the very end. Noah closed his eyes, his grip tightening. For the first time in years, the word together didn't sound like a fantasy. It sounded like salvation. The night cracked open with the sound of Harper's ragged breathing. At first she thought it was just another wave of nausea or the strain of the gala catching up with her. But then the sharp tightening wrapped around her belly and made her clutch the edge of the bed. She looked at the glowing digits on her nightstand clock, 2:14 a.m., and whispered a curse under her breath. Too early. It wasn't supposed to happen yet. She had at least 2 more weeks. Another contraction rolled through her, fierce and undeniable, and she knew it wasn't false labor. Panic pressed hot against her chest, but beneath it was the steel she had forged her whole life. She grabbed her phone and hit Noah's number without thinking. He answered on the second ring, his voice thick with sleep but instantly alert. Harper? What's wrong? It's happening, she hissed through clenched teeth. Contractions. They're fast. I can't. Her voice broke into a gasp as another one tore through her. Stay where you are, he said firmly. I'll be there in 10 minutes. The drive to her apartment was a blur of red lights and slick streets, but Noah barely noticed. His knuckles were white on the wheel, his heart hammering in his ears. When he burst through her door, Harper was half doubled over, one hand braced against the wall, sweat beating at her temple. Even then, even like this, she managed a wry smile. You're late, she whispered. You're insane, he shot back, sliding an arm around her waist. Come on, we're getting you to the hospital. They made it to the truck, and Noah helped her into the passenger seat. Rain streaked across the windshield as he pulled out onto the road, pushing the old engine harder than he ever had. Harper gripped the dashboard with one hand, her other arm clutched protectively over her stomach. Breathe, Harper, Noah said, his voice low but steady, even as his own pulse raced. In through your nose, out through your mouth. Stay with me. I am breathing, she groaned, her eyes flashing. And if you say that one more time, Harris, I'll... She broke off with a sharp cry as another contraction surged. Noah pressed harder on the gas, rain blurring the road ahead. You're not doing this alone, he muttered, more to himself than her. Not now. Not ever. They reached the hospital in record time. Nurses rushed out with a wheelchair, and Noah found himself running beside them, Harper's hand gripping his so tightly his fingers went numb. Inside the sterile, blinding light of the maternity ward, everything happened at once. Doctors asking questions, nurses adjusting monitors, the beeping of machines rising like frantic birds. Harper was prepped for an emergency delivery, and Noah hovered at her side, his presence an anchor in the chaos. Before the doors swung shut to the operating room, Harper caught his wrist. Her face was pale, her eyes fierce despite the pain. She pressed something small and familiar into his hand, a beaded bracelet strung with colorful plastic charms. This is Lily's, Noah whispered, startled. She gave it to me last week, Harper said, her voice thin but steady. She said it was for luck. Tell her it worked. The doors closed between them before he could answer. Noah stood in the corridor, staring down at the bracelet in his palm. His chest ached with the weight of what she had just entrusted him with. Not just her child, not just her hope, but her belief that somehow all of this was connected. That maybe, just maybe, Lily's gift was about to save them all. Minutes dragged into an eternity. Noah paced the hallway, his heart slamming against his ribs every time a nurse passed. He thought of Harper's bravery, her stubbornness, the way she carried her pain like armor. He thought of Lily's thin arms around his neck, her whispered questions about superheroes and happy endings. He thought of how impossible it all seemed. And yet, here he was, waiting for the kind of miracle you only read about. Finally, the door opened. A doctor stepped out, pulling down his mask. His face was weary, but his eyes carried relief. A boy, he said, healthy, strong, and we collected a high-quality cord blood unit. It looks very promising for your daughter's transplant. Noah's knees nearly buckled. He gripped the edge of a chair and sat hard, the bracelet still clutched in his fist. For the first time in years, the dam inside him broke, and tears came freely. Not tears of despair this time, but of gratitude, of sheer, overwhelming relief. Somewhere down the hall, a newborn cried, sharp, insistent, alive. And Noah let himself believe, truly believe that this was the sound of a future being rewritten. The transplant ward was a world unto itself, a white sterile cocoon where every sound echoed sharper than it should, where even the air smelled filtered and unnatural. Noah sat in the chair beside Lily's isolation room, his hands folded together so tightly his knuckles were pale. Through the thick glass, he could see his daughter lying in the hospital bed, a small figure swallowed by blankets and machines. Her cheeks were sunken, her skin almost translucent, but when she noticed him watching, she lifted her marker and drew a crooked heart on the window between them. He lifted his hand and pressed it against the glass opposite hers. She smiled weakly, her eyes bright despite her fragile body. The doctors said the transplant was their best chance. They said the cord blood collected from Harper's baby boy was a strong match, better than anything they'd seen so far. It would be a long process and there were risks, but for the first time in years, there was hope tethered to something real. In another wing of the hospital, Harper cradled her newborn against her chest. The boy slept peacefully, his tiny breaths rising and falling in rhythm with hers. She stroked the fine golden fuzz on his head and whispered promises he was too young to understand. She was exhausted, body aching from the labor that had come too soon, but she refused to let herself collapse, because she knew the fight wasn't just hers anymore. That was when her assistant rushed into the room, pale and flustered. "They've called an emergency board meeting," she whispered. "The directors want to vote on your temporary suspension. They're citing instability, the media chaos, your absence." Harper closed her eyes for a moment, then straightened her back against the pillows. She shifted her son carefully into the crook of her arm and reached for the tablet on the bedside table. "Then I'll join the meeting," she said. "But no excuses." Her voice was steel again. "They think I'm weak? Let them see exactly who they're dealing with." Minutes later, the boardroom flickered to life on her screen. Dozens of faces filled the squares, each one tense, expectant. Harper adjusted the camera so they could see her clearly. Her hair pulled back, her newborn nestled against her chest, the beeping of hospital monitors faint in the background. "You're joining from the maternity ward?" one of the older men scoffed. "This is highly unprofessional." "This," Harper said calmly, "is my life, and the life of the company you're trying to tear apart." Murmurs rippled across the call. Some directors exchanged uncomfortable looks. Others stared at her with open disdain. "You've made the company vulnerable with your personal choices," another board member said. "The investors are losing confidence. You've turned a fintech empire into a soap opera." "No," Harper shot back. Her voice rose, cutting through their complaints like a knife. "What I've done is turn this company into a force for good. Do you want to know what instability looks like? It's parents choosing between saving their children's lives and paying rent. It's families being crushed under medical debt while we sit here arguing about quarterly profits. That is instability. And that is exactly why tomorrow we're launching Gift of Life." She clicked a button, and a presentation filled the screen. Bold slides outlining a program of free cord blood collection kits in hospitals, mobile donation teams, transparent public registries, real numbers, real lives saved. "This isn't charity," she said, her voice steady, unwavering. "This is innovation. This is leadership. While other companies hoard wealth, we're going to build trust. We're going to save lives. And the world will see Lantern Pay not as a scandal-ridden empire, but as a company that dared to stand for something more." For a long moment, silence filled the call. Then voices erupted. Some angry, some inspired, some caught between. But the tide had already turned. Screenshots of her presentation leaked within minutes. By evening, hashtags were trending worldwide. Parents shared stories of children saved by cord blood donations. Reporters called her bold, visionary. Investors who had doubted her were suddenly reconsidering. Meanwhile, Noah sat by Lily's bed, watching the numbers on her monitor. For days, they had lingered low, static, unchanging. But then slowly they began to climb. 1, 3, 500. Every new digit felt like a miracle. Every upward tick a prayer answered. He wrote them down in his notebook, his handwriting shaky from relief. Through the glass, Lily smiled at him again, her small hand resting against the heart she had drawn. He pressed his palm there too, tears burning in his eyes. Back in her hospital room, Harper whispered to her son, "This is what strength looks like. Not numbers, not titles, but love." She thought of Lily, of Noah, of the family that had somehow grown from the storm of despair. And for the first time since her world had begun to fall apart, Harper Lane believed that everything, her fight, her pain, her defiance, had been worth it. The first warmth of spring had begun to soften the city when the doctors finally told Noah Harris the words he had been too afraid to hope for. Lily was strong enough to go home. He had been holding his breath for months, waiting for the numbers on the monitors to turn against them again, waiting for the ground to vanish beneath his feet the way it always seemed to. But instead, the doctor smiled. The transplant had taken. Her body was responding. The nightmare was finally loosening its grip. On the morning of her discharge, Lily was almost unrecognizable from the frail child who had entered those hospital doors. Her hair was still thin, her face still delicate, but her eyes sparkled with something Noah hadn't seen in too long. Unfiltered joy. She ran ahead of him in the hospital lobby, her little sneakers squeaking on the polished floor. She wore a floppy sun hat that was too big for her head, one of the gifts from the nurses who adored her. When the sliding doors opened to the outside, she burst through them with her arms wide like wings, inhaling the scent of blooming trees and fresh air. Harper was waiting at the curb. She looked different now, softer around the edges, though the fire in her eyes remained. She stood with her son's stroller beside her, rocking it gently with one hand. Her hair was swept up, a few strands loose around her face, and when she saw Lily charging toward her, she dropped to her knees, arms open. Lily threw herself into her embrace. "You're here, man," she said breathlessly, hugging Harper as though she were a second mother. "Of course I'm here," Harper whispered, holding her tightly. Then Lily leaned back, peeking into the stroller with the cautious awe of a child seeing something sacred. Inside lay the baby boy, Harper's son, fast asleep, his tiny fist curled against his cheeks. "Is he really my superhero?" Lily asked in a conspiratorial whisper, as if afraid the baby might wake. Harper smiled, brushing a strand of hair from the girl's forehead. "He's part of your story, but the real superheroes are you and your dad. You both fought harder than anyone I've ever known." Noah joined them, his eyes stinging at the sight. For months, he had lived in fear of never seeing Lily stand tall and strong again. And now here she was, hugging Harper, asking questions, alive in a way that filled his chest with both relief and disbelief. That afternoon, instead of holding a press conference, Harper invited them to a quiet picnic at a small green patch near the very same gas station where they had first met. It was almost poetic. The cracked pavement and neon lights that had once been a backdrop for despair now overlooked something entirely different. Harper laid out a blanket, pulled warm burgers and fries from a bag, and for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, they sat together without fear hanging over their heads. Noah watched as Harper handed him an envelope. His calloused fingers hesitated before opening it, but when he unfolded the letter, his breath caught. Lantern Pay had purchased the land around the gas station. They were building a center there, a place called New Beginning, a resource for families in crisis, a hub where parents could access support, education, and medical connections without drowning in bureaucracy. "This is too much," Noah said, shaking his head as he lowered the letter. His voice was rough, nearly breaking. "You've already done enough, more than I could ever—" "This isn't too much," Harper interrupted softly. "This is exactly right. You and Lily showed me what matters. Not the numbers in an investor's report, not the headlines. This, people, families, that's what matters." Noah stared at her, and for the first time since they had met, he let himself imagine a future that wasn't just survival. He let himself imagine happiness. But Harper wasn't finished. She reached into her bag again and pulled out a small velvet box. She held it in her hand, not opening it yet, her gaze steady on him. "This isn't about debt or pity or even gratitude. This is about us, about what we've built, what we've already proven we can face together." "Noah," her voice wavered for the first time in days, a rare crack in her usually unshakable tone. "Will you walk forward with me? Not as the stranger who stopped at a gas station, but as my partner. As my family Lily, who had been quietly munching fries beside them, looked up, her eyes wide. She tugged at Noah's sleeve and whispered, "Say yes, Daddy. Please." Noah's chest ached with the sheer weight of the moment. He looked at his daughter, her face glowing with life and hope, her small wrist still wearing the plastic beaded bracelet she had once given to Harper for luck. Then he looked at Harper, the woman who had turned his world upside down and rebuilt it with her own hands. He took her hand in his, closing her fingers around his, grounding himself in the simple truth of it all. "Yes," he said, his voice steady. "Let's go together." Harper exhaled, laughter and tears mingling at once. And in that moment, the storm that had shadowed them both for so long finally seemed to break. Months later, the New Beginning Center opened its doors. On the day of the unveiling, a sign lit up above the entrance. It wasn't sleek corporate branding, not polished design. It was Lily's drawing, enlarged and turned into a glowing emblem. A smiling sun with long, colorful rays. One ray, brighter than the rest, was made from the same sequence of beads on her lucky bracelet. Parents gathered with their children, doctors spoke of hope, and for the first time in a long time, Noah, Harper, Lily, and the baby stood together not as survivors, but as something more, as family. And in that sun, in those rays, the world could see what had begun one stormy night at a forgotten gas station. Not an accident, not a scandal, but the start of a new life. For me, this story isn't just about a chance encounter between a struggling, single father and a pregnant millionaire. It's about how two completely different worlds, the life of a man barely holding it together and the life of a woman people considered untouchable and unshakable, can collide at their most vulnerable moment. And in that vulnerability, true strength is born. The ending shows that happiness is never built on money, status, or headlines. The real miracle here is the faith they found in one another. Harper proved that the strength of a leader doesn't come from cold distance, but from the ability to love and protect even when the whole world turns against you. Noah showed that heroism isn't measured in public victories, but in the daily fight for a small life that trusts you completely. At the beginning, they were tied together only by a storm at a gas station. By the end, they are bound by something no crisis, no board of directors, no illness could ever break. A family chosen by the heart, not by circumstance. In my view, the ending works precisely because it doesn't pretend to be a fairy tale perfect resolution. It's about the honest, heavy road that leads to the light. And that light doesn't come from millions in a bank account, but from the sun Lily drew, where the brightest ray was made from her simple child's bracelet.